Hello and welcome to Dialogue. I'm Xu Qianduo. The 20th CPC National Congress had just concluded in Beijing with a national plan put forward to guide China's development for the next 5 years and beyond. What are the highlights of China's next phase of development into the future? What is the West's perspective on this monumental meeting? And what global role will China play in the years to come? Earlier, I spoke with Grzegorz W. Kolodko, former Deputy Prime Minister of Poland, on this topic. I started our interview with the significance of the Congress.
That is very important event, especially in the political system like there is in China, the Congress of the leading party in actually a monoparty political system. But what we are looking for, well, we want to know how China is going to continue economic reforms to give a little bit more power to this invisible hand of market and a little bit less to this too often intervening visible hand of government, because it is also important for business from other parts of the world, how open China will be for interacting economically, for the flow of direct investment, portfolio investment, the capital market liberalization, and so on. Definitely, we are looking to hear much more what China is going to do in the forthcoming years as far as natural environment protection and counteracting the warming climate are concerned, especially the latter. Warming the climate is something what we have to do together.
Well, when it comes to the relationship between countries, it has a lot to do with understanding of each other, in this case, the understanding of China. I know you have been observing the Chinese development for more than 30 years. 33 years ago, this is your first trip to China. I wonder, what's your impression of China then and China today?
Well, China 30 years ago and China now, it's a very different country. I'm saying that one has to compare Chinese system, both a complex system, political and economic one, because it is just a complex political economic system with Russia on the one hand and with India. 30 years ago, Russia's GDP, at that time still part of the Soviet Union, was 3 times bigger than Chinese. Now Chinese is 7-fold bigger than Russia. This is the tectonic change the humankind never seen in the history of civilization. On the other hand, 30 years ago, in 1991, the GDP per capita in India was slightly higher than in China. In both countries, there were hundreds of millions of people living in extreme poverty. Now in India, we have more than 100 million people living in extreme poverty, according to the World Bank definition. No more, less than $1.9 per day on purchasing parity, and it has been erased completely in China. This is the extremely great success of Chinese economic policy, and one has to take it into account. So the question is, if China choosing 3 generations, 3 decades ago, a different political path, how would be now the social and economic situation in China? I think it would be much worse, much more similar, say, to India. And that makes some countries envy. They don't understand that we have to find a way, I mean, they in Washington or London, that we have to find a pragmatic, peaceful way to work arm with China, how to solve the global problems and how to take advantage of this stage of technological economic development for the benefit of our societies through the peaceful cooperation, not hostility. So the trade war between US and China was declared by the US. The second Cold War was started by US, and now the situation is getting much more complex. So also China is facing now more problems on the international scene than, say, it was the case 12 or 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Well, obviously, China's progress and the achievement, massive achievement, it has a lot to do with its own, the path it chooses, or the Chinese system, which you describe as Chinism, hybrid sort of between, Chinese socialism or Chinese system with socialism with Chinese characteristics or Chinese capitalism. From an economist's point of view, and what is Chinism? Tell us more about that. How significant is it for people in the West, probably, to understand how China works?
It's a good question, because all the time we have to hear and we have to make a point. Is China communism, or is it China Chinism, or if you wish, following the Chinese approach, socialism with the Chinese characteristics? Or is it capitalism? Or what kind of capitalism? So this alternative, black or white, doesn't apply. China is neither black nor white. China is neither communism or capitalism. It's a hybrid system which has some features of socialist based on state property, planet economy, socially oriented, and some features typical for liberal capitalist economy, free enterprise, private property, deregulation, inequality, unfortunately, and so on. But if you will take a closer look, it is neither black nor white. It is neither capitalism or socialism. So it's another quality. I call it Chinism. So this is the hybrid system, which is pretty good, far from perfect, but pretty good, taking advantage of the power of invisible hand of market with the visible hand, maybe even too much visible sometimes, hand of the government. But the difference between such a mixture elsewhere, say in Saudi Arabia or in Egypt or in Brazil, if you wish, is that in case of China, it is being supported by meritocracy. In case of China, we have hybrid system of market and government and state, but which is a meritocratic one. The economic show, the political show, is run by educated, competent, responsible, accountable people, which I cannot say with due respect, say about the countries like Nigeria or Saudi Arabia, Russia or Bangladesh. So the question is how it happens that China is able to combine a little bit of democracy, a little bit of authoritarian system, a lot of market, a lot of government intervention, but still under the stewardship of meritocracy. And this is the recipe, the systemic recipe for incredible Chinese economic success. But there are still the problems. And because there are the problems, what you know much better in China than anybody else in the wide world, the question is how, by what means China will progress in the future.
The future, yes, especially today, of course, if you look at around the world, full of uncertainty. But speak of the Chinese, progress, all the, the reaction to that may be, in particular in the United States, there is this rise of xenophobia or even anti-China, anti-East Asian sentiment. You've tweeted that the sooner the West realizes that its xenophobia is a fatal way of approaching the matter, the better. So is probably the rise of China or the rapid rise of China somehow, help generate this kind of a fear? Of course, it is unfounded, let's say.
I put some trust in China. I'm looking forward what President Xi Jinping is going to deliver, what he will say during forthcoming G20 summit at Bali in Indonesia. I think people of the world will be very carefully listening to what President Xi Jinping will say, because by and large, we will know what is going to be said by President Biden, President Macron, or the new Prime Minister of Great Britain, We will see who will be the president of Brazil. I believe that it will be Ignacio Lula da Silva, not anymore Bolsonaro. So we will see, but we'll be listening carefully what President Xi Jinping will say about China's approach to global challenges. And there are some new additional global challenges which we did not have, say, a year ago during the previous summit. First of all, coming out of the conflict in eastern Ukraine. Political situation in the world has got much more complicated with some economic consequences also for countries far away from here. So now only the continuation of Chinese Six Belt and Road Initiative is not enough. I'm looking forward to hear something from China, maybe at this G20 summit, how we can move from the current stage of military build-up of the military spiral into the other direction. The American energy sector now is making great business. United States next year will be the second greatest exporter of oil after Saudi Arabia. In next year, 2023, US will be the first exporter, even ahead of Qatar, as far as export of natural gas is concerned. So actually this energy crisis we have now in the world is beneficial for the American lobbies, but it's not good news for most of the people of the world. And of course, not for China, not for Poland. So I expect some propositions which may be good not only for China's economy, but also for some other countries from China. But everything must go through a dialogue, not through kind of soft or hard, hot or cold confrontation. We do not need such ill-advised initiatives.
Let's have a break. We'll continue our discussion right after this.
Such a viewpoint that the future of the world is to be shaped by division in two parts, Euro-Atlantic led by US and Euro-ASEAN led by China and Russia. It can consist of two parts of Euro-Atlantic megasphere and Euro-Asian megasphere. And in both of them, there is Europe. Cold War is devastating for global cooperation and social and economic development, but it is very fruitful for some lobbies. We might think to say again, as we used to say 50 years ago, make love, not war.
Welcome back. So what's the relationship between China and Poland, between China and Europe like in your eyes?
Well, Poland is already for almost 20 years member of the European Union, and therefore we shape our relations with China within the framework of a bolder approach of the European Union. But that is Polish relations with China, were very friendly and based on pragmatic economic and political cooperation since the first days of China's People's Republic already 73 years ago during the previous Polish socialist system. And now when we moved to different political arrangements, these relations are based on pragmatism. There is a lot of Chinese economic and cultural activity to be seen in Poland. I wish there will be more of us present in the Chinese cultural and economic exchange, but the relations are positive. We were not following the American pressure to be more skeptic or say even anti-Chinese. We develop our economic relations, the exchange of culture and students. And I'm teaching my international students at famous Beijing Normal University Belt and Road School. Now there were some problems because of the pandemic, because we cannot travel to China and the other way around. But President Xi Jinping visited Poland, the same the previous Chinese leaders. And I think it is not just a symbol. It has a political, but also an economic meaning that President Duda was attending the opening ceremony of the Beijing Winter Olympics, and he met with President Xi Jinping. As for Europe, it's also based on pragmatism. Plenty of European countries, especially the members of the European Union, because we must be aware that they are the countries outside of European Union, but they are still European. Say, starting from Great Britain, but also Norway, Iceland, Switzerland, the rich countries, and the countries lagging behind, like Serbia or Bosnia and Herzegovina or Moldova. And very many of them, this outside of European Union, but in Europe, they are looking towards China to get some assistance, to get some transfer of technology, to trade. But more than that, to take a part also in the Belt and Road Initiative. And China has seen this approach different of European Union than the United States. And I think that American approach to China is also somehow under the influence of more pragmatic but less ideological approach which we exercise in the European Union. So it could be better, always. It could be better, but considering the whole international atmosphere, the European Union relations with China are on the positive side of the exercise.
Mm-hmm. On the positive side, that's obviously, relieving to hear that. But still, because of the heavy influence of the United States on its allies, for example, allies in European countries, so there's a concern that countries' China policy could be heavily influenced by Washington, because Washington is, from their point of view, is competing with China geopolitically. But for European Union or other European countries, their relationship with China is basically based on, as you said, pragmatic cooperation, trade, investment, people-to-people exchange, climate change, for example, the common interests. Do you have the similar concern that sometimes probably, the U.S. influence is too much on European countries in terms of like mapping out their China policy?
It's a big problem, because the American, that is US agenda, is different than European one. From the viewpoint of public political narrative, we hear the same in London, Berlin, Paris, Warsaw, as we hear, say, especially in Washington. But if one is taking a little bit closer look what is going on, one sees that American approach is driven more by kind of ideological seeing, less by a pragmatic one, and European very much by pragmatism, but does not mean that we accept unconditionally everything what is occurring in Chinese political system, etc. There's plenty of talk each day. You have to listen in country like Poland or Italy or Greece or Sweden about human rights, about democracy, about independence, etc. But if you go to square one, you see that actually that is very much about American drives to hegemony. The Americans, the US, was it under Bush or Obama or Trump or Biden administration, they are not ready to accept that US is not and will never be again a hegemon of the world, that this must be shared with China, and that is what they don't accept. With the European Union, which they do accept, but not unconditionally. They want still to be the leader of so-called Euro-Atlantic Alliance. Recently, we could read in the very influential British-American weekly, The Economist, such a viewpoint that the future of the world is to be shaped by division in two parts, Euro-Atlantic, led by US, and Euro-ASEAN, led by China and Russia. By China and Russia, which is not making very many people happy in Russia, because they would prefer to hear by Russia and China. I'm against such an approach, especially since the economists had written that sometimes they may use, aside of economic and political competition, also military leverage. I think that we do not need any military leverage to use here, and instead of hostile competition, we can exercise friendly cooperation and friendly competition, because I'm not naive. I'm first of all economist, and there will be a lot of competition between China and Germany, between Germany and France, between European Union and United States, and so on. But we may compete in a peaceful way, and I can't see any dangers against such an approach coming from China. But I may see some, unfortunately, from US or UK. So my approach is that instead of talking about splitting the world for two parts, somehow even hostile, and for that reason we do have this Cold War, it can consist of two parts of Euro-Atlantic megasphere and Euro-Asian megasphere. And in both of them, there is Europe, there is European Union, there is Poland, Germany, France, and for that reason, European Union can be a positive link between China and North America, not just a part of world which is taken aside in American-Chinese conflict, which is driven, first of all, by American megalomania and American hostility to China. That is my reading of the current global situation.
Of course, because of the efforts of the Second Cold War, we are seeing that the reverse of globalization. Some people would call it deglobalization. So what's your response? In what way we can do probably, because globalization benefits every country?
One has to understand that Cold War is not just an incident. It is deliberately being fueled. Cold War is devastating for global cooperation and social and economic development, but it is very fruitful for some lobbies. Cold War is very fruitful, beneficiary for military industrial lobby, very positive for energy lobbies because of soaring energy prices in the atmosphere of the Cold War. So we need the leaders which will be forced enough to break the neck of the powerful military industrial lobbies in their country and to say, stop this idiocy, stop this fly of the moth to the fire, because it is getting dangerous. Cold War can become hot war, not world hot war, but we do have conflicts here and there, not only in Eastern Ukraine, in some other parts of the world too. So the situation is getting dangerous, and I can't see any chance to turn the corner and to reverse the process as by the proper leadership. Leadership here is a critical one. We do need leaders on the national and international stage, which will be able to face their own people and to say them, stop this stupid Cold War, military build up. We don't have enough resources to fight pandemic, to fight warming the climate, to fight the poverty. That is where we have to spend the money. But we are going otherwise. In my country, in Poland, the parliament, without any voice against, has raised the military spending to 3% of GDP by law. Now we have to spend 3% of GDP on so-called defense. And at the same time, the government has to explain to teachers or to doctors that there is not enough money for raising the quality of healthcare or education services. This is very short-sighted policy. And of course, the argument is there is the war, there is the conflict. We have to protect ourselves. Okay, we can protect ourselves by ending the Cold War, by negotiations, by sitting at the table, not by getting ready to shoot to each other. From this perspective, it is very important not to make any such mistake as Mr. Putin has committed as far as Eastern Ukraine is concerned, because this conflict may escalate. It can last much longer than it was presumed at the onset. It can escalate it can be much more devastating for the world as such. And from this perspective also, this Congress of Chinese Communist Party somehow is important because China is so important in the world. And we would like to hear what good propositions are coming from China. And the good propositions are the ones which will be taken seriously by the partners in the West, United States, European Union, Japan, NATO. And for that reason, it is also important what will be the follow-up on the international scene. We do not need more hostility. We may need to say again, as we used to say 50 years ago, make love, not war. It's not naive, it's not utopian. This is a must if you want to survive and to continue the social and economic development in a peaceful way. It is possible. Not everybody has to follow Chinism. Not everybody has to follow so-called liberal democracy or neoliberal capitalism. There is plenty of room for all of us. Yet now the movement, the traffic in the world became dangerous because the street lights are malfunctioning in this world of us. But to all of these challenges, there are the solutions. But that does imply that the problem will be solved. The things can get much worse. And for the time being, they are getting worse, day after day. So let's hope that day will come when we will start to move into the other direction, that the things will improve. It's possible, it may happen, but by all means, it is not going to happen without this special, extraordinary effort.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you, Mr. Kolodko. Thank you for your time and insight. On that note, we come to the end of today's show. Many thanks to Mr. Grzegorz Kolodko. You can also watch us on the CGTN app on YouTube. I'm Xu Jindor. Thanks for being with us. See you next time.